All right, so get ready because today we're diving into some pretty controversial territory.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be tackling a claim that's been making the rounds.
Okay.
It's this idea that the polio vaccine, the one that was given to millions of Americans back in the mid-20th century, was actually contaminated with a virus that causes cancer.
Oh, wow.
Pretty heavy stuff.
It could be a big deal for sure.
Yeah.
Especially because the source is saying that this could have impacted multiple generations.
Right.
Like we could be talking about something that's affecting people today.
Exactly. And you know what makes this even more interesting is that our source material for this deep dive is an audio clip.
Okay.
And the title of this audio clip is CDC admits 98 million Americans were given cancer virus via the polio shot.mp3.
Wow. That's definitely grabs your attention. Right?
It does.
The clip claims that a lot of you probably don't know.
Okay.
That the CDC supposedly admitted that a huge number of people, we're talking 98 million,
received a polio vaccine dose that was contaminated with something called SV40.
So SV40, that stands for simian vacculating virus.
Okay.
And right away, that raises a question.
What's that?
What's a simian virus doing in a vaccine that's meant for humans?
Right.
To understand that we need to go back to how polio vaccines were made back in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
They used cells from rhesus monkey kidneys to grow the polio virus,
Okay.
which they needed for the vaccine. Unfortunately, it turned out that some of these monkey cells were carrying SV40, and that ended up contaminating some of the vaccine.
So it's like they threw in a monkey wrench, but instead of a wrench, it's a virus.
Yeah, exactly.
And this audio clip doesn't shy away from suggesting that this SV40 contamination could be the reason why some cancers seem to run in families?
That's a pretty big claim.
Yeah.
Because they're implying that this virus that may have been introduced through the vaccine could be hereditary. The source specifically points to soft tissue cancers, things like breast cancer or stomach cancer, and suggests that this contamination could be why we see these cancers appearing in different generations of the same family.
And they go even further and say that there was a CDC webpage that straight up admitted they knew about this contamination back in 1960.
Wow.
But here's the kicker. They say this page was quickly taken down. It makes you wonder, right?
If that's true, it really raises some questions
Yeah.
about scientific transparency and public trust.
Like, what happens when important discoveries are hidden from the public?
Exactly. It can really erode your confidence in institutions like the CDC.
It's like finding out someone kept a secret from you, even if it was meant to protect you.
Right.
But the audio clip doesn't just rely on, like, anonymous internet whispers.
Yeah, okay.
They actually name a Chicago professor,
Oh, really?
Dr. Michael Carbone, who apparently independently verified that the SV40 virus was present in tissue samples taken from cancer patients from that time when the vaccines were given out.
Independent verification is super important in science. If Dr. Carbone's research actually backs up what the source is claiming, then it adds a lot of credibility to their argument.
Right.
Of course, we need to look closer at his methods and findings to get the whole picture.
Totally. But then the clip takes a sharp turn and goes straight into conspiracy theory land.
Oh, no.
They bring up this story of Mary's monkeys.
Okay.
A batch of monkeys that were used in research.
Right.
And start hinting that this whole cancer situation was like a weaponized plot.
Oh, wow.
I'm not going to lie, that part made me a little skeptical.
I can see why. It's like they're trying to make a big explosion, but they forgot the dynamite.
Right.
To even consider the idea of weaponized cancer,
Yeah.
we would need some serious evidence.
Right.
We'd need a motive documentation.
Right.
Something more than just a vague suggestion. It's so important to separate speculation from the facts.
Especially with something as sensitive as this.
Exactly.
And speaking of public health, the clip then brings up a 2012 study from Italy that apparently found traces of SV40 in healthy volunteers.
Really?
And what makes this interesting is that it kind of goes against the idea that the contamination problem was solved back in the 60s.
It definitely challenges that narrative.
Right.
The common belief is that once they found the contamination issue with the early polio vaccines, they took steps to eliminate it.
Yeah.
So if this Italian study is right, and SV40 is still out there, it brings up some big questions about how that's even possible.
The audio clip makes it sound like there's this hidden epidemic that the CDC is trying to sweep under the rug. They even use this study to imply that SV40 could be transmitted today.
Okay.
Maybe even passed down through generations.
Wow.
It's a pretty scary thought.
I can understand why someone might jump to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Especially when they hear about a CDC webpage being taken down.
Right?
But it's important to remember that there could be other explanations.
Like what?
Well, web pages get updated and redesigned or even moved all the time.
Right.
For different reasons.
That's true.
It doesn't automatically mean that they're trying to hide something.
Right. Assuming the worst case scenario isn't always the best way to think about things.
Definitely not.
Especially when we're talking about vaccines and public health.
Yeah.
Which already tend to spark a lot of intense emotions.
For sure.
We need to look at all sides of the story before forming an opinion.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
Critical thinking is so essential in these types of situations. We have to look at the evidence objectively, consider different perspectives,
right,
and be wary of sources that are relying on fear or conspiracy theories to make their point.
Okay, so let's take a step back and see what we've learned so far.
Okay.
We know that contamination with SV40 did happen in those early polio vaccines.
Right.
There's some evidence suggesting that there might be a connection to certain cancers, but the research isn't totally clear.
Yeah.
And the claims about weaponized cancer and a CDC cover-up?
Right.
Well, those are highly speculative, and there's not much evidence to back them up.
It sounds like we've only just started to look at this whole SV40 thing.
It feels like we've just dipped our toes in.
There's a lot more to uncover.
Definitely a lot more to unpack, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We've got a whole world of scientific research about SV40 that we need to explore.
Yeah.
Let's dig deeper into the evidence and see what we can find.
Let's do it. Okay, so we've established there was SV40 in these early polio vaccines.
Right.
But can you tell us more about the virus itself? Like,
sure.
Is it really as dangerous as the audio clip makes it sound?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So research has shown that SV40 can cause tumors in some animals.
Okay.
But the evidence linking it to cancer in humans is much more complex.
Okay.
And honestly pretty controversial. Some studies have found a possible association between SV40 and specific cancers.
Like what?
Like mesothelioma.
Mesothelioma.
Yeah, that's a cancer that affects the lining of the lungs and the chest cavity.
Okay.
And also things like brain tumors and bone cancers.
Right.
But other studies haven't found any link at all.
Oh.
It's not a simple yes or no answer.
So even with all the research that's been done,
yeah,
it's still kind of a scientific mystery.
Pretty much. And that's the challenge when you're dealing with something as complicated as cancer.
Right.
It's rarely caused by just one thing. We have to think about genetics, environmental factors, lifestyle choices.
Yeah.
And yes, potentially exposure to viruses like SV40.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but you're missing some pieces.
Yeah.
And some of the pieces might not even belong to the same puzzle.
That's a great way to put it.
Dang.
And to complicate things even more, that Italian study we talked about adds another piece to the puzzle, a piece that doesn't quite fit.
In what way?
Well, if SV40 is still out there in the world, maybe even being passed down through generations, that brings up a whole bunch of new questions.
The audio clip definitely made it seem like there's this hidden epidemic that the CDC is trying to keep quiet.
I get how someone might think that, especially when they hear about a CDC webpage being taken down.
Right.
But it's important to remember that there could be other, less dramatic explanations.
Like what?
Well, web pages get updated all the time.
Yeah.
They get redesigned. They get moved to different parts of the website. It doesn't automatically mean that someone is trying to hide something.
Right. It's like when you reorganize your closet.
Exactly.
Your clothes are still there. You just put them in a different spot.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're trying to get rid of them secretly.
Exactly. It's important to keep that perspective when we're talking about these complicated issues.
Yeah.
It's easy to jump to conclusions. But critical thinking is really important.
Right.
We need to look at the evidence objectively, consider different viewpoints, and be careful about sources that lean on fear or conspiracy theories to make their point.
So it's like being a detective, but instead of clues, we're looking for facts and evidence.
That's a great way to think about it.
So where do we stand with all of this?
Okay, so we know that the contamination with SV40 happened.
Right.
There's some evidence suggesting a possible link to certain cancers.
Yeah.
But the research isn't conclusive.
Okay.
And those claims about weaponized cancer and a CDC cover-up, well, they're highly speculative, and there's not much solid evidence to support them.
Okay, so we've got a possible link, but not a smoking gun.
Right.
But what about that Italian study that suggested that SV40 might still be around?
Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of add fuel to the fire?
It's definitely an interesting piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
But remember, just because they found traces of SV40 in healthy volunteers doesn't automatically mean those people are going to get cancer.
Right.
We need more research to really understand what those findings mean.
So it's like finding a footprint at a crime scene.
Exactly.
It could be the culprit, or it could just be some random person.
Right. We need more evidence to connect the dots.
Right, so more research is needed. But in the meantime, what about people who got the polio vaccine back in the 50s and 60s?
Yeah.
Should they be worried about this SV40 thing?
It's understandable to be concerned.
Yeah.
But it's important not to panic.
Okay.
The vast majority of people who were exposed to SV40 through the vaccine haven't had any health problems. And like we've been talking about, the link between SV40 and cancer in humans is still pretty uncertain.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
But what about this idea of SV40 being passed down through generations?
Right.
Does that mean that younger generations who weren't even alive when these contaminated vaccines were used could still be at risk?
That's a question that researchers are still trying to figure out.
Okay.
That Italian study we mentioned gives us some interesting evidence for potential ongoing transmission.
Right.
But we need more research to confirm this and to really understand how it could happen.
So there's no clear answer yet?
Not yet. Science is a process of constant discovery. We're always learning new things and figuring out how the world works.
Right.
And when you're dealing with something as complex as viral transmission and cancer development, there's still a lot we don't know.
So it seems like with this whole SV40 thing, the more we learn, the more questions we have.
That's true, but I guess that's how science works.
Right.
It's not always about getting those definitive answers.
Right.
It's more about constantly learning and refining our understanding.
That makes sense, but it really shows how important it is for all of us to be critical thinkers.
Oh, absolutely, especially these days.
Yeah, with so much information out there.
Right. It's information overload.
Exactly. It can be really hard to know what to trust.
Being a careful consumer of information is so important now more than ever.
So it's not just about taking in information, it's also about filtering it. Making sure it's coming from a good source.
You got it.
Do you have any tips for our listeners on how to do that?
Yeah, I'd say the best place to start is with organizations that, are trustworthy.
Like what?
Like government health agencies.
Okay.
Like the National Institutes of Health.
The NIH.
Yeah, the World Health Organization, the WHO, and of course the CDC itself.
Right.
They all have tons of information based on scientific research and what the experts agree on.
Okay, well, what else?
Also look at well-established medical organizations and peer-reviewed scientific journals.
Okay, so those are usually pretty reliable.
Yeah, you can usually trust those.
And I'm guessing we should stay away from those websites or social media posts that make big claims about shocking discoveries.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially if they're using a lot of personal stories that haven't been checked out.
Right, because those can be misleading.
Totally. They often present opinions or stories as if they were facts.
Yeah, you really have to be careful.
If something sounds too good to be true, or if it makes you feel scared or rushed,
right,
it's probably a good idea to double-check it with a more reliable source.
So it's all about finding that balance between staying informed and not falling for all the misinformation out there.
Exactly. It can be tough sometimes.
It definitely can be.
Knowledge is power. But only when it's accurate and reliable.
Right.
In this world where misinformation spreads so quickly, being a critical thinker is like having a superpower.
I love that. So to recap today's deep dive, we've tackled this claim about the polio vaccine and a cancer-causing virus.
Right.
We talked about the science behind SV40. We looked at the research about its possible connection to cancer in humans.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, we talked about why critical thinking is so crucial when you're looking at these kinds of claims.
Absolutely. And hopefully we've empowered our listeners to do their own research and come to their own conclusions.
That's what the deep dive is all about.
Exactly. Giving you the tools to navigate all this information out there.
With confidence and curiosity.
That's it.
So for our listeners who want to learn more about this, here are some key search terms to get you started.
Okay, what are they?
SV40, polio vaccine contamination, and cancer research.
Those are great.
These will lead you to a bunch of resources where you can really dive in and learn more.
Awesome. And as a final thought, something for everyone to consider as they continue learning.
Yeah.
In a world where misinformation is everywhere, what are some things you can do to make sure you're making health decisions based on good evidence?
That's a great question for all of us to think about.
It is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay critical.